issues and wellness within the profession across the country over the last number of years. I really started doing it about 10 years ago, but in the last few years, it's really evolved. And I think that I usually am excited to hear that people found me to be an engaging speaker, but that's when they see me in person. And in this new Zoom world, without an audience there, and some of you who are trial lawyers may understand this, there's a certain amount of feedback that you sort of feed off of. And so I lose that. So I want to just apologize if I'm not as engaging a speaker as you've been led to believe I would be, but I'll certainly do my best. So I want to talk to you about we'll get to it, and I'll save all your questions. You can put them in the chat function or write them down. There's lots of time. I'm going to be 20 or 30 minutes in my talk, and then there's lots of time to answer everybody's questions. I want to explain why this is important to me, this issue of wellness. As lawyers, we tend to be, for the most part, type A personalities, and those of us that aren't become them often in the context of the practice of law. Now, I don't know much about, my firm has offices in Alberta and BC as well as Ontario, and I practice through those offices in those provinces as well, which are similar to Ontario in terms of the pressures. I don't know what it's like in the Northwest Territories, but I will assume, like every other lawyer in the country, there are concerns about making sure you bill enough to cover your overhead and make a living. And if you're in a firm, that you bill enough to satisfy your partners and your bosses, etc. So if that's not the case, then a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about may not matter. But generally speaking, we are a profession, a hyper-driven profession that is not known for work-life balance, and is also not known for talking about things that we now know in society at large are huge issues: drug addiction, alcoholism, other sorts of addictions, depression, anxiety, other forms of mental illness. We know that these things are there. The sad reality is that our profession is hit even harder than the general population. So just to give you some idea, Statistics Canada estimates that 5% of all people will have a major depressive episode in a given year, and 18% will have some form of mental health issue in their life. 5 to 8% of the population at large in Canada will be addicts or substance abusers of some kind at some point in their life. Here's what's shocking. Within the legal profession, that 5% of major depressive episode, or 5 to 8% of addicts, is 3 times. All of the studies seem to suggest in Canada that it is triple the sort of population at large. There was a very, very large study done a couple of years ago in the United States by Hazelden, which is one of the largest rehab facilities, and they found between 21 and 36% of lawyers qualify as problem drinkers, and approximately 28% are struggling with some level of depression, 19% with some level of anxiety and stress, and 23% with also some high level stress. So we definitely have a real problem in our profession, and I know that firsthand. So I'm going to tell you my story, and how it's made me a better lawyer and a better person, and why I go out and do these talks. And as I say, I've spoken all over Ontario and throughout the country, and I've written extensively, and I've been in the media extensively about this because I think it's a really, really important topic. So my story begins, like most of our stories begin, when we become articling students. I articled at a firm. I was a law student. I graduated from Osgoode Hall Law School in 1991. And I went to article at a small boutique law firm in downtown Toronto, doing a mix of civil litigation and family law. And it was a very old, what we'll call an old school kind of firm, older lawyers, very senior. I was this young, unpolished guy. I should point out it was a very, what we would call I guess what they call a white shoe firm, very much an old money kind of firm. And here I was, this relatively poor uh, uh, and unpolished Jew that joined their firm. And I really didn't fit. And that was fine. There was one lawyer there who was in his mid 40s. And that lawyer sort of saw that I didn't really fit, but that I had potential as a lawyer. And he took me under his wing. And I would spend a lot of time sitting with him, just listening to him talking about cases, having him review and critique the materials I would draft, have him help me prepare for court arguments. And ultimately, really somebody that made my articling experience truly fantastic. And but one of the things that I noticed as my year went on was that he was never around at lunchtime. And I found that odd. He had no shortage of time for me at any hour of the day that he was in the office, early morning, after hours, middle of the day if he wasn't with a client. He was very generous with his time. But often I would go to look for him at lunchtime and say, let's go downstairs in our office building and get a sandwich. And he was never there. And I couldn't figure it out. And I would often ask his assistant, and she would say, oh, he's out at a meeting. And I sort of thought it odd that he would be out at a meeting every day at lunch hour, but I just sort of parked that in the back of my mind. And towards the end of my articling, he actually did take me for lunch. And I asked him about the fact that he was never around at lunchtime. And he told me that the reason was he was going to AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And he proceeded to tell me a story that in his late 30s, he had flamed out. He had been a partner at that firm and had a very successful civil litigation practice and was well respected by the judges before whom he appeared. He was married, and he hit rock bottom because he had an out of control alcohol problem. And ultimately, he explained to me that the firm forced him to take a leave of absence. He went into a residential rehab treatment program. His marriage fell apart. He lost whatever, he lost his house, he lost his money. And it turned out that at the time that I joined the firm as an articling student, he had just rejoined earlier that year and was basically starting over as an associate. So here was a guy who had 15 years of experience or thereabouts at the bar, and was now in his 40s, essentially starting over as an associate and a fairly junior associate. And I remember thinking, as he was telling me the story, I remember thinking, wow, what a loser. How the fuck did that happen to this guy who had it all? And with all the vim and vigor of a 25-year-old or 24-year-old Osgoode Hall Law School graduate, it was easy for me to look down my nose at him and say, wow, I don't know how that happened, and that ain't ever happening to me. Well, you already kind of know where this story goes, because otherwise I wouldn't be here speaking to you. That was in 1991. By 2008, I was that guy. I had built a very successful practice over 15 years, almost 15 years, I guess. I was called officially in 2003, and I set up as a sole practitioner. And I then joined a firm after a year, and I basically built my own practice within the context of the firm. And I had built a practice that was a mix of criminal, family, civil, and commercial litigation. And I did quite well, well enough that I was recruited regularly by other firms. Ultimately, I left and did go to another firm after about 7 or 8 years. And then I was recruited further by my largest client, who asked me to come in-house as they had expanded and become their first vice president and general counsel. And I thought, after a little more than 10 years of litigating at that time, that with all of the hours that entailed. And, I think back and I try to tell the young lawyers and the students that work for me today, because they have no concept of what it was like not to have a computer, not to have a cell phone, and, to have to stand at a payphone in the courthouse on the lunch break in order to, call in and have your assistant read messages off, a little piece of paper to you. And to have to go back to the office at the end of the day, after court was done at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, drive back to the office and sit there for 2 hours and return phone calls because the cord on your phone only went this far away, right? And you had to physically see what was in the pile of mail and faxes that had come in. And so, I don't need to tell anybody on here how draining that is. And so when the opportunity came to go in-house, even though I feel that I'm a litigator through and through, and I was now going to be a sort of corporate suit, I took the job because it meant that I wasn't going to work nights. I wasn't going to work weekends. I was going to get a similar pay to what I was already earning as a lawyer with, quite frankly, a lot less effort and the status that comes with being in that role. I think I was 37 or something at the time. And, I had one young child. I was having, my wife at the time and I were trying to have more children. Ultimately, we did, and had twins. So I now have a jump to the end of the story, just to share this. I now have a 24-year-old son and a boy-girl, twin set, boy and girl, who are 16. And my son just blessed me. My son and his wife just blessed me with a grandson about 3.5 months ago. So, this is why I go out and do these talks, because I'm going to get to the point of the story where I'll tell you how I might not have made it this far if I hadn't sort of come to the realization that I did. So I'm chugging along, as most of us are, making a living, doing my practice, except there's a problem. Here's the problem. I fucking hated what I was doing. I wasn't a corporate lawyer, but there I was sitting in an office as a suit. And for the first time in my life, I had a boss, because even though I had been part of a couple of firms, I had been either an associate who generated all his own work, which meant I could do what I want, and I was paid on the sort of eat what you kill thing. I've always felt I'll bet on myself rather than take a salary. It's worked out more often than not, except for this period of time I'm going to tell you about in a moment. But it's always worked out, or I've been a partner in those firms. And so for the first time in my career, I suddenly found myself with a boss who was a great boss. I'm just not somebody who can conform to having a boss. That's a character flaw, I suppose, that I have, but it is what it is. And that's why I'm a litigator. And that's why I don't have a salary. And I generate my own work, and I live based on that. And it gives me a certain amount of control. And we'll come back and talk about that at the end of my story as well. So my marriage was also falling apart at that time, notwithstanding that my wife was already pregnant with twins at some point as I was into that job. I hated the job. I hated having a boss. I hated the work I was doing. My marriage was falling apart, and it was really, really tough. And I started to fall into now what only retrospectively realized was, a horrible depression. And so I began to self-medicate. I have unfortunately suffered from migraines from the time I was 10 years old. I'm now 53. I still suffer from them. But through what I went through, I've learned to deal with them in a way that doesn't involve narcotics. Unfortunately, by about 2008, I was deep in the throes of this narcotic addiction. So what happened in the 90s, and if any of you are old enough to remember, there was a thankfully now outlawed practice amongst pain management physicians that they decided that opioids should be given prophylactically. Traditionally, of course, opioids were given for breakthrough pain, and very severe breakthrough pain. And as a migraine sufferer, or anybody that had chronic pain, you were told, here's, 30 pills, and these better last you for a year, because you should only take this when the pain is so severe that you can't function in all other circumstances. You don't go to the opioid. Unfortunately, somewhere in the early 2000s, there came along this idea, as I said, that they were going to use it prophylactically. Now, fortunately, that has long been, I can't speak for the Northwest Territories. Certainly in Ontario, any doctor who operated that way today would have his or her license taken away. They've changed all of those rules around prescribing. But in those days, 2006, 2007, 2008, it was relatively easy for me to get access. The doctors were giving them out to me prophylactically, and I had multiple doctors. I like to say that I am the reason in Ontario now that there is a rule that physicians must carry their prescription pad on their person in the event that they're not set up to do so electronically. I was one of many addicts who would steal pieces of prescription pads. You may remember, and again, there was a time in Ontario where, you would sit first in the waiting room, but then you'd go into the little room where the doctor would see you, the examining room, but the doctor might not come in for half an hour. And sitting on the counter where they had the gauze pads and the Band-Aids and the tongue depressors, there was usually a prescription pad, and it was usually thick enough that if you just took a few pages off, nobody would know. And so ultimately, when you have multiple doctors, you have extra prescriptions, you have multiple pharmacies, you have ample access to these drugs. And so that was how I initially chose to deal with my depression, with a job I hated, with my marriage falling apart. That was how I chose to deal with it. I would wake up in the morning. If I couldn't function, I would take the OxyContin. That would get me out of bed, ready to go. If I was in court and I started to lag a little bit or feel sad at lunchtime, more OxyContin over the lunch break, and now I'm good to go for the whole afternoon. Then the evening came along. Same thing, you have to go out, you have to do business, you have to generate your own business. So I've got to take somebody out for dinner or go to some charity function, or take by that time, my older son was older and involved in activities, and I would have to take him there. And again, needed a little bit of help to get through that. So there's some more OxyContin being ingested. And then at the end of the day, as I'm going to sleep and my mind is racing a million miles a minute, what did I do? I took more of the OxyContin to get to sleep. So as I say, I took it to get me up, I took it to get me down, I took it to get me through, and I just took it and took it and took it. I read some years ago, about 2 years after I got clean, I read a study that was done that said that if you take more than 300 milligrams a day of OxyContin on a regular basis, that basically it could blow up your heart. They called it cocaine heart. You would have, I don't understand the science behind it, but essentially what would happen is your heart would just explode, or something like that, I guess. Again, a doctor could better explain it, but essentially what it said was if you did more than 300 milligrams of this a day, you might die. And I can tell you that by 2008, by my peak, I was easily at 300 a day, and on some days 400 and 500 milligrams a day. And I was it was a death spiral, because what I thought when I started was that the narcotics would be a salve. It would make the depression go away. It would make me better able to deal with the parts of my life that I didn't want to deal with. The unhappiness would make me better able to look inside myself and deal with the unhappiness. But it didn't, because what we now know, I mean, when I say this, now everybody, when I speak, they say, well, of course, we all know that, but I don't think we knew this in sort of 2008. What we know is that it's a vicious cycle. And so the more you take the narcotic to chase away the depression, the more the depression comes back to chase the narcotic. And the same thing with the pain. So the way I justified it, because my by then ex-wife would say to me, you're an addict, you have a problem, you need to go into treatment, you need to get help. And I would say to her, well, no, you just don't understand. Like, I have these fucking migraines every day, and I have to get up and go to court, and I have to be on, and I have to do the great job. And people are paying me to keep them out of jail, and people are paying me to make sure they see their kids. And I can't just lie in bed because I have a migraine. I need these drugs so that I can function. And that was my justification. But again, much like with the depression, it's the same thing. Your body adjusts to understand the level of pain, and therefore the more narcotics you take, the more pain you have. It seems counterintuitive to think that the more painkiller you take, the more pain you have, but that's sort of biologically, that's exactly what ends up happening. And so my migraines got worse, my depression got worse, and my use of the narcotics got worse. And it got worse to the point that I reached a point by late 2008 where I really, really, truly couldn't function. I wasn't able many days to get out of bed and go to the office. When I did go to the office, I would often sit there in a daze and just, you know, certainly not focus on my work. I don't think I ever missed a court appearance, and somehow I was magically able to function in court, and somehow I didn't take any money from my trust account that didn't belong to me. So those two things, I think, were just pure luck, because it certainly ended much worse for many people in the midst of addiction or depression who help themselves to money that's not theirs, or don't show up for court appearances and things of that nature. So I'm not sure how, but somehow I managed other than that. But with those exceptions, I was completely non-functioning, except in my head. Of course, I thought I was functioning, and people tried to help me. You know, there were a couple of lawyer friends of mine who I can think of two instances where two different groups of lawyers that I knew well, who were friends, tried to stage these sort of little interventions. My ex-wife, of course, tried very desperately to help me. My brother tried to help me. Ultimately, I just kept shooing them all away and saying, well, you guys don't understand. I'm fine. I can handle it. I need this for the pain. And one of the things that's important to understand is that addicts will lie to everybody. But most importantly, the addict lies to himself. That's just a fact. So I was lying to everybody, and I was lying to myself. And I knew I needed help by that point, despite the fact that I was pushing these friends away and telling them to, you know, how dare you tell me that I have a problem. Deep down inside, I knew that they were right. But I didn't seek help, and I didn't seek help for the same reason that historically in our profession, so many people do not seek help. And there may be people that are listening today. There may be people that are seeing this after the fact online. There may be people who you talk to about this who are in a situation where they want to get help for whatever their issue is, and they can't do it. And why can't we do it? We can't do it because we have a problem in this profession. We have two problems, really. We have a problem with ourselves. Well, maybe three problems now that I think about it. So we have a problem internally with our sense of self. We have a problem with the profession as a whole, and we have a problem with the Law Society. So the Law Society is a problem because, of course, everybody is concerned that, well, wait a minute, if I have to come out and say that I have this problem, what does that mean? Is the Law Society going to come in and, you know, start auditing my practice? Are they going to take over my practice? Are they going to discipline me? Are they going to suspend me? So there's all of this fear because and it seems much nicer perhaps in Northwest Territories from my brief interactions with the people at your Law Society there. But, you know, in Ontario, there's a very large fear. I mean, lawyers, and particularly sole practitioners and small firm lawyers, really live in fear of the Law Society. So that creates a problem. The second problem is the profession as a whole. It's what will people think? We know that this is a competitive profession, and we know that we rely often on goodwill. I mean, the largest, certainly for me, over the course of much of my career, until I joined this firm 3 years ago, that is the largest personal injury advertiser in the country. Before that, my whole career, my work came from personal connections, and much of that work, the bulk of it, came from other lawyers who didn't do the things that I did. And so, there's a genuine fear that people have that you're going to alienate your referral sources. Your referral sources are going to be afraid to send you work because you've told them you're not able to handle it by coming out and saying, I've got these issues. But the other problem is that they may also, there's a fear that they may not give you back the work down the road once you do get help and get better, because they will look at you differently. And certainly that is, fortunately, as a result of the work that law societies and law associations across the country and law schools across the country are doing, and as a result of a much broader understanding of these issues in society at large, I think people are starting to have a better understanding of issues like depression and mental illness, of issues like addiction. And so it's getting easier now, but it's still not easy. There's the fear that, of course, your clients are going to turn on you. The fear that, as I say, other lawyers are going to shun you. If you're in a firm, the fear that your firm, your bosses, your partners, your associates are going to shun you. And these are genuine fears, and many lawyers have experienced those things. So these are not unfounded fears at all, even today. And so certainly, the needle has moved a lot in the last 10 years, but it's certainly not there where it needs to be yet. And so that's the fear that people have today with, sort of saying, I need help. And it's certainly the fear that I had at the time. And then the other fear is really, it's a self-imposed fear. I was a lawyer. I did criminal, family, civil litigation for mostly small businesses in those days. And people are coming to me with the most important things in their lives. People are coming to me to protect their liberty. People are coming to me to make sure they get to see their children after a divorce. People are coming to me to save their business that's going under, and so there's this difficulty when you try to look inside yourself and say, how can I possibly come out and acknowledge that I have a problem? All of these people for all of these years are paying me, relying on me to manage the worst of what's going on in their lives, to guide them through the most difficult time in their lives. How do you possibly look yourself in the mirror and say, I can do that? I can continue to shepherd these people through the most difficult times in their lives, but my own life is so fucked up and I can't handle it. And so there's that fear of confronting yourself. And ultimately, those are the reasons that I didn't seek help. And those are the reasons that people today are afraid to seek help. And ultimately, I did get help. And I was very lucky to do so. Ultimately, at the end of 2008, beginning, I guess, probably more into the beginning of 2009, I don't know what triggered it, but I think it was the Law Society starting to call, and I realized I was going to be in a great deal of trouble because there were numerous complaints from clients who said, we've been looking for this guy and he doesn't return our call. And we went to his office and his assistant said she hasn't seen him in 3 weeks and he doesn't respond to my, I've sent faxes, but he's not at his office. By that point, we had email. They said, oh, we sent an email, but he never responded. We've called him on his cell phone, but he didn't respond. And then, of course, the Law Society starts writing to me, and I ignore their letters as well. And I didn't ignore them willfully. I ignored them because when you're going through an addiction and mental illness, addiction, depression, anxiety, call it what you will, because they're all the same in terms of your reaction. The nature of the illness, whether it's a drug addiction or anxiety, might be very different. But ultimately, many of these things all come together. And more importantly, the reaction or the lack of reaction is the same. And that is as follows: the acknowledgement on an intellectual basis that I need to pick up this phone today and call the Law Society and answer that letter that they sent me and explain to them that I'm not ignoring the client, I'm just having some health issues and I can't deal with it. But the reality is, although you know that intellectually, physically, and anybody who's gone through any sort of major depression, I think, and I know when I tell this story in live audiences, there are many people where I sort of see heads nodding quite frequently, because people understand, anybody that's going through any sort of depression or anxiety can understand this. You know intellectually that I must, pick up this phone and dial this number and make the call. But physically, there's a disconnect between my brain and my arm. My brain says you need to do it, but my arm doesn't move to pick up the phone to do it. And then the day goes by, you say, okay, well, I guess I'll do it tomorrow. And that cycle just perpetuates itself until, before you know it, months has gone by. And now the Law Society is, knocking at your door. So I reached that point and I really didn't know what to do. And in Ontario, we have what is today called was then called, I don't know why I'm blanking out on the name. It was the Ontario Lawyers Assistance Program is what it was called. Today it's called the MAP, the Members Assistance Program. And it just so happened that in Ontario, the fellow who was running that program was a former lawyer turned social worker who I had known on and off throughout my life, because our paths crossed through mutual friends over the years. We both grew up sort of in the same neighborhood and are the same age and have the same circle of friends. And I went and sat down in his office and I said, I need help. And what do I do? And he said, well, the way I see it, you have one choice. You need to close your practice and devote yourself to recovery for as long as it takes. And if you're really committed and we get you into a treatment program, maybe in 3 months, 6 months, but maybe it's going to take a year, who knows? But this is what you need to do. And I said, well, how am I supposed to do that? I have kids, I was divorced, I have child support payments to make, I have to keep a roof over these kids' heads, I have to have an income. How could I possibly just close my practice? By the way, I had, as a result of this addiction, I had ultimately been forced out of my role as VP and General Counsel. The addiction had led to some acts of lack of judgment on my part. Fortunately, again, they didn't involve any missing money or things of that nature, but they did involve behavior that was certainly inappropriate for somebody in that leadership role in that firm. And I was asked to tender a resignation, which I did, and I went back to practicing as a sole practitioner, initially working out of my house and then renting some office space from a friend of mine. And it didn't take me long, actually. That was about 2005, 2006, 2007. It all sort of runs together. I'm often, and I apologize, I often do get the dates confused and from one talk to the next. And the reason is that really from probably 2003 to 2009, I have a tremendous memory. There's large periods of that time that are just blackouts, which I now understand is normal when you're in the throes of an addiction. And I thought, when I went to get help at the beginning of 2009, I said that my addiction had been, it was 2 years in the making. It really started in 2007, but in speaking to people around me and in speaking to my ex-wife and my friends, the addiction probably really started in somewhere around 2002 or 2003 and went on for a number of years. But again, for many of those years, it was truly functional, and then it became completely dysfunctional. Um, and I said to this fellow, how in the world am I supposed to just close my practice? And his answer was, well, you have two choices. You can close your practice, or you're going to die. He said, I've seen it. He said, I'll give you a list of lawyers that have died because they didn't do what they needed to do to get better. So that's your choice. And ultimately, I then spent the better part of 2009 doing exactly what I was told to do. I was matched with peer mentors we have through this program in Ontario, peer mentors. So I was matched with two different lawyers who had both been through what I had been through and recovered successfully and had rebuilt their lives and their careers. I was told to go to get a new family doctor. I would need the help of a family doctor. And I was told in no uncertain terms that it ought not to be any of the doctors that had ever prescribed me this medication. And I went to a new doctor and said, here's my story, here's what I'm doing. And he said to me, that's great, I will help you, but you're gonna have to, he said, I don't think you need to go to an in-house treatment program. This is gonna take a year, we're gonna taper you off, you're gonna hate me, but if you do what I tell you to do, it's going to be the most difficult thing you'll ever do, but I promise you, you'll get through it. And if you don't listen to me, then I'm going to drop you as a patient. And so I spent the better part of the next year, for 2009, getting weaned off of these narcotics, and just, I had a psychiatrist and a psychologist and these two peer mentors and a family doctor. And so every business day was another appointment. And that was the better part of my life, from early 2009 till about November or December. And I knew by January of 2010, I would be clean and ready to come back to work. And I did somewhere around January 15th of 2015. I had an opportunity presented to me to join up with a firm. And again, it was just through the good graces of people who knew me and wanted to help me. And I was presented with an opportunity, which I took, and I went back to work in January of 2010. And in May of 2010, I got the letter from the Law Society of Ontario. I got the letter that said, you're in trouble for something you did in 2008. So all of those calls that I hadn't returned, which in Ontario is a violation of a rule of professional conduct that says you should respond to the Law Society promptly and you should cooperate with any investigation. And so that was ultimately what they said I failed to do. And they were right, I had failed to do it. Although quite frankly, I'd assumed by 2010 that everything was fine because those incidents happened in 07 and 08. But our Law Society is very, very backlogged in terms of getting through these things. And so in May of 2010, as I was 5 months into rebuilding a practice, I was happy, I was healthy, I was clean, and I had to go in front of the Law Society Discipline Tribunal and acknowledge that I had not replied to them in a timely manner and had not cooperated with their investigation. And as a result, I was given a 30-day suspension through the good fortune of my lawyer's negotiation and the fact that the panelist, the tribunal adjudicator, happened to be a retired judge who I had earned some goodwill with over the years in my court appearances. I was given the opportunity to fashion a suspension where the 30 days was served in the month of August rather than immediately, as is normally the case. And that worked out because I had already booked 3 weeks off in August and rented a cottage to go away with my kids. So it wasn't really that big, it wasn't that big a deal. And I went away for the month of August. I came back and there was lots of work waiting for me. My office, of course, had to follow the rules. And when people called in looking to make appointments, they had to be told that I was under a suspension, but I would be back on the 1st of September. And people waited. I was really amazed. And so some of the things that came out of that was I was amazed that lawyers who who I was afraid to turn to for help, and some of whom had sort of shunned me as I went through this. Once I came out and said, this is what happened, people started sending me work. Almost all of those referral sources returned to me. I had a client who had been one of those people who had reported me to the Law Society because I wasn't responding to him. And he found out what happened and came back to me, and has continued, came back to me as a client at that time in 2010. And although his matter's long done, he's become a very nice referral source over the last 10 years. And I found that people were much more understanding than I expected them to be. And so I began to do these sorts of talks and the writing that I do and the speaking that I do somewhere around 2011. I knew that and it started off, I will concede, it didn't start off altruistically at all. It was really, I had learned from all my years of working for politicians behind the scenes. I'd worked on many, many election campaigns in my life, and I'd learned that you always want to control the narrative. And so I felt, well, now there's this black mark on the public database that anybody can look up. And it's out there that I did something bad and I had a suspension, and how do I address that? And I thought, well, look, I wasn't ashamed of it. I didn't steal anybody's money. I didn't assault anybody. I had an illness, and I've overcome that illness. And so I decided I would get out in front of the story by writing an article for one of the one of the regional law association journals, and then for one of the legal publications. I don't remember if it was Law Times or Lawyers Weekly, but I just gradually started to write, and that then begat other publications contacting me to write. It begat associations asking me to come and speak, and those have ramped up over the years. And as a result, I continue to be very busy doing these sorts of things. But my reputation is now long secure as far as I'm concerned, and I'm very busy. I've rebuilt my career. I'm in a much better place career-wise than I think I would have been had I never sort of fallen down that hill. Just thinking of where my trajectory was going to where it is now. Oh, somebody says that they're having difficulty hearing me. So I just want to make sure before I continue that that's not a problem.
Darryl, it's Glenn here. You're good at my end.
Okay. I may have to, I didn't realize that my computer is draining much faster than I thought. So I'm going to finish my talk, and then if we could take a 5-minute break before the Q&A so that I can just go find a charger that I don't have right handy at the second. If that's okay.
Good enough, sure enough.
All right. So the question is, why do I do these talks? Why do I spend a significant amount of time that, this is billable time today? Why do I spend all this time? And the answer is because I got out. I got lucky. And I say all the time that I thank God every day that I got clean before fentanyl came along. I think fentanyl started to become common around a year or so after I got clean. And I absolutely know, based on my constant increase and usage of OxyContin, and understand I wasn't just taking it, I was crushing it, I was chewing it, I was snorting it, anything to get the high faster. There's no doubt in my mind that if fentanyl had been around before I had gotten clean, I'd be dead. And I know that because I've lost a number of friends to overdose, alcoholism, and depression, lawyer friends, in the last 10 years. And that's the reason that I go out and do these talks, because the message that I want to give you, the thing I want to leave you with in this talk before we go to the Q&A is, My life is a million times better now because I did get help. If I had not gotten help, I think I would have been dead. But I look at other lawyers that I've represented at the Law Society over the years that had similar issues and didn't really get help. And they've ended up disbarred. They've ended up, if they didn't end up dead, they've ended up disbarred, disgraced. Their whole lives have just fallen apart. So the two choices, if you don't get help, are death or disgrace, and you don't want either of those. And what's come of this, though, for me, is the greatest thing ever, which is that I'm not just in a better place as a lawyer. I'm in a better place as a person. I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. I'm a better friend. I'm not just a better lawyer, but I'm also better as a lawyer to work with. I treat my client, I have much more empathy for my clients. I think I'm a much more enjoyable person to be around in the work environment than I used to be. I was somebody that I think as a result of hubris was, a combination, and the most deadly combination is arrogance combined with insecurity, right? And we know that those things are often connected. And I think in our profession, that's a really, really, really common thing. And I certainly had that. And I was an unhappy person, and I was unhappy. People were probably unhappier than I wanted to believe to be around me. So I'm going to leave you before we go to the Q&A, and I find my charger so I don't fade out. I want to leave you with three lessons. So I've come up and this is, sort of how I end all of these talks. There are three lessons that I learned through all of this and that guide me every single day when I wake up and go through my life today. And they are as follows. One, lose the ego and replace it with humility. One of the problems in our profession is that as lawyers, we think we're better than. Society tells us we're better. From the time you get into law school, you're told you're better than the person who didn't go to law school. You're better than your client because you have this specialized knowledge. You're better than your neighbor because you make more money, whatever the case may be. It's all bullshit. It really is. At the end of the day, this is a job. This is a great profession. I'm so happy after 27 years that I still get to do this. There's still nothing greater for me than arguing a case in court, even arguing over Zoom, as I've been doing recently. It's the greatest job in the world, and I make enough money to have a reasonably decent life at it and put my kids through school. So I feel humbled and blessed to be able to do that. And I realize that the ego is the most ridiculous thing in the world because we're not better than anybody else. We might be more educated, we might earn more money, but we're not better as human beings. And many of us are a lot worse, quite frankly. So get over the ego, I taught up until last year, till the pandemic, I was an adjunct professor at Osgood, and I was teaching. I would make a point of teaching the students, get over yourself. You're all leaving here thinking, oh, I've got a law degree from Osgood. I'm hot shit. And I would say to them, you're nothing. You're going to come and work in my office and you know less than, than the person who answers the phone here. So you know nothing. So get over yourself. We're lucky to do this job, and many of us are able to combine. I'm very lucky that I'm able to combine making a really good living with doing a lot of work that helps people. I'm fortunate now that I make a decent enough living and I'm paying clients that I can do a fair amount of pro bono work and really help people. But you can't really do that till you start learning that you've got to treat your clients with empathy and that you're not any better than your clients are. So lose the ego, replace it with humility. Number two, lose the envy and replace it with gratitude. We spend and I don't know that this is as big an issue in Yellowknife, but certainly in a big city, in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Alberta, in Calgary, there is an issue with everybody chasing the next thing. I got to get a newer car, got to get a better house, I've got to get a nicer suit, I've got to get, that will just kill you. And for what? You're chasing things that you don't need. Even this idea that people come out of law school and it's, I have to be a partner, have to be a partner. And I'll tell you, having been a partner in firms, having owned my own firm, partnership is overrated. It's nice to be a partner, but it certainly isn't the be all and the end all. So again, what envy will do is drive you to do things you don't want to do. Envy will drive you to take the drugs, to keep going, so that you don't have to stop and you can just keep going. Envy will drive you into depression because you're looking around at what everybody else has. So just get over that. I now look at gratitude. And I know it sounds trite because in the last couple of years, we've seen so many books and self-help books and public speakers talking about gratitude, but it's a real thing. It is a real thing. And it's the little things on the way to getting the big things. I still have goals. I still want nice things. I still want to achieve different levels in my career, but I'm also able on a daily basis to look around and see little things. So yesterday, for example, although they didn't come over, my son and daughter-in-law weren't able to come over, but FaceTime me, and I spent 20 minutes on the phone FaceTiming with my 3.5-month-old grandson, and I hung up the phone feeling like, well, nothing could replace that. Like there's nothing better in my day. But I can tell you that 15 years ago, I wouldn't have even had time. My son, the father of my grandson, will tell you that when he was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I didn't have time for him because I was too busy working. I missed all of his school stuff. I missed the parent-teacher interviews. I missed a lot of his games. I missed a lot of stuff because I was too busy working. And I would feel that if I was there at his school or at his event, I was missing out on trying to get the next big thing, as opposed to just living in that moment and saying, wow, this is great. And then finally, the last thing is this: lose the fear and get out of your comfort zone. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, a lot of people say, well, I'm miserable, I'm unhappy, and the only way I'm going to be happy is if I leave my relationship, if I get rid of these toxic friends, if I get rid of this 10% of my client base that's taking 90% of my time, if I leave this firm and get a new job, if I leave this firm and start my own firm. But nobody does it. Nobody does it because there's a fear of the unknown. There's a fear of, well, what if? And so it's that old expression, right? Better the devil you know than the devil you don't. It's tough, but you got to do it because that's the path forward. Ultimately, humility, gratitude, and not being afraid to make the big changes. And sometimes that means looking deep, deep inside yourself. So that's my story. Those are my lessons. Thank you guys for listening. I think it's important that I do these. I hope you feel it was important that you were here. And if we can take a 5-minute break, I'm going to be back to take some questions.
Great. Thanks, Darryl. Thank you so much. We'll just keep the session open. So if you want to run away and
I'm
get
just
a
going
charger.
to stop my video. I'll be right back.
All right. So everybody, if you've got some questions, if you want to throw them into the chat function, then what we'll do is when Darryl gets back, and I see there's at least one already. When Darryl gets back, I'll just list them to him and let him respond to them.
So yeah, okay, I think I've answered. So over the course of the year of 2009, as I said, I had a psychologist, I had a psychiatrist, I had a family doctor who was trained in addiction medicine. I had these peer mentors. So it was a lot of both medical intervention and psychological intervention in terms of really therapy, and the therapy has continued. So even though I got clean and I stopped with the sort of traditional recovery things that, and I did, by the way, I should point out, in 2009 I did go to some AA meetings, um, that I was taken to. I have a view that is different than a lot of people in the recovery community, which is that I'm not a big fan of the 12 step. However, to the extent they work for people, by all means, you should do it. I tried it, it wasn't right for me. What was more, what worked for me was really the peer counseling, the peer mentoring, and that's the sort of thing we do in Ontario with our members assistance program. So I now volunteer to be that person that somebody going through this in Ontario can talk to. And sometimes just hearing that somebody similarly situated went through it is really, really important. That was a big piece of the puzzle for me, because it's all great to have a social worker or a doctor say to you, well, yeah, I understand, but do they really? But somebody that is, somebody that had been an addict, that was a lawyer, that had flamed out, that had started their practice, that had rebuilt their life and their reputation and their career, that person really could understand you. I have continued on and off for the last 10 years with various forms of what we'll call therapy, whether it's psychotherapy, talk therapy, all kinds of self-reflection. And I will tell you that for me, even doing these talks as I do is a form of therapy, because it forces me to remember as I tell the stories. And sometimes I've told much more detailed stories, depending on how much time I have or the nature of the panel. Sometimes I get into some, really dark places that I went to. And that's important, because it forces me again now, I will leave this, I will log off soon, but for the rest of the day today, this is in my mind, and I'm now forced to confront that part of my life again. So it's just continuing to come back to these three principles that I mentioned, continuing to remember what it was like at my lowest, and that sort of keeps me moving forward. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Darryl. And there's a comment from Renee who says that there's a resource called smartrecovery.org, and she makes some comments about that. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but I don't profess to be familiar with everything. That sounds like it might be a great resource. So by all means, people should check it out. As I say, I have my views on what works for me. Different things will work for different people. I think when it comes to recovery from an addiction or overcoming depression or anxiety, there really are different things that work for different people. One of the things that, I don't take any medication for depression. I did for about 4 or 5 years after I was clean. I was on an antidepressant. My doctor and I felt that it was, really my doctor, because who am I to know? My doctor felt that if I felt okay, we could try going off it. I've been off it for years now. So I don't take any medication. On the other hand, there are people who will need to be on antidepressant medication or anti-anxiety medication for the rest of their lives in order to be, to recover in a sense and get on with their lives. So I think that, I certainly don't buy into the one size fits all model when it comes to overcoming these things. We're all individuals. It's different things that drive us into our addiction or into our mental illness. So you have to be, I think, equally unique in fashioning something that will work for you.
Thanks again. Any other questions anybody has? We'll wait another couple of minutes. If not, and
Yeah.
while we're waiting, again, I just want to thank you for coming and telling your story and telling it in an open and honest way. Reminder as well that for everybody who's on the in the conference who's a member of the Law Society, we do have assistance programs that are available. The information's on the back of your Law Society card. It's accessible on the Law Society website. There's lots of places where you can go and get help. And we've talked about that a lot, and we continue to talk about that a lot because this is important. Darryl, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll let you, thank you again very much.
It's been it has been my absolute pleasure, and thank you guys for giving me, as I say, it helps me to come out and do these talks. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. And as I say, I hope that everybody leaves here, and if it's not you that needs the help, maybe there's somebody in your firm or in your life or an opposing counsel that you think might need that help, and you'll be hopefully more attuned to what those issues are now. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Darryl. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Nice talking to everybody.